since you started in 2020, a few things have happened in the software development world, and including coding agents. And you've said that coding agents, on average, pull 50% more open source software than humans. First, why is that, do you think? And then what should companies be doing about that?
So an agent will often reach for a dependency because it's the fastest path to solving a problem. And they're also trained on, huge corpuses of open source code. And so there's a lot of open source code that, informs how agents write their own code. And so, in this world of, like I was talking about earlier, in this new world where there's just dependencies flying around everywhere and our apps are built on this mountain of open source code, it's not really a surprise that you have agents, basically building software in the same manner as the human code on which they were trained. There's some risks that come with that. So, obviously we all know about hallucinations. I think, that's gotten a lot better as models have gotten more powerful, but we do still see models making up package names that don't exist. It's almost like hopeful or wishful thinking where they say, hey, this problem I'm trying to solve, it would be a lot easier if this package existed. I'm just going to pretend it exists and let's try to go install it. And of course, attackers have realized that they can now go and typo squat the names and hope that agents will come and actually install those. And so this is why it's really important to change the traditional security model we've had, where in the past people really focused on what are called known vulnerabilities, or CVEs. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as. And these are the typical software vulnerabilities or basically bugs or accidents in software. But what we really need to do is think about a much more expansive definition of trust, because when an agent is looking to install something and that package, let's say, has 50 downloads, like no one's using it effectively. It's a very, very niche. Maybe it was published 5 days ago, right? No one has heard of it. In the traditional security scanner world, before Socket, tools that companies would use would scan that code and say, hey, there's no known vulnerabilities. Like, I haven't found any reports saying that this is vulnerable. But the reason for that is nobody's bothered to look at this code. No one is using it, right? It's literally completely random code. And so, but that doesn't mean it's safe just because it has no known issues, right? There's probably a lot of security vulnerabilities in it, not to mention the entire package itself could be malicious or could be designed as bait for, your AI agent to install. And so, that was a big part of the shift when we started the company, was we wanted to make sure that people could, from first principles, take an untrusted piece of code and make a determination about whether they want to use it in their application or not.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. And Pierre, one of the founders at Tesorio, asked, GitHub stars can now be kind of bought via marketing, and sometimes popularity can be also bought via marketing and other things that are spoofed. What are the real signals that either you're looking for or developers should look for on these?
Yeah, well, I think that the source of truth at the end of the day is, what does this code do when we run it? At the end of the day, this code is open source code is going to be, bundled into your application that you're shipping to your users, right? Or that you're pushing into production. And, the operating system doesn't care whether you wrote the code or whether an attacker wrote the code or whether an open source maintainer wrote the code. It's all part of your code at the end of the day. So people need to sort of have a mindset shift around this, because for a long time people thought, well, it's open source, it's not my problem, right? I'm sure the community will take care of it, or it must be good because others are using it, right? But we've seen with things like Axios, it doesn't matter how many people are using it. Hundreds of millions of people could be using it, and it could still get compromised, right? And so, superficial metrics like stars, even download counts can be faked, right? We saw this malicious skill that was called "What Would Elon Do?" and a lot of people were installing it to sort of inject a little bit of that Elon energy into their AI responses, and it became the number one skill because it turns out the skills marketplace that was hosting it, I'm not going to call it which one it was, but they just had a trivially exploitable kind of download. It was very easy to inflate the download counts, and so they became the number one skill. Yep. Even though they didn't really have any organic usage, and of course, then they got a whole bunch of people installing it because it was number one on the leaderboard. Yep. And so these metrics are often gameable. We've built some detections to figure out when people are buying stars, when we see like unnatural star networks and things like that. But to answer your question, what should people look for? You need to have something that is ungameable and tied to ultimately what is the code going to do. And so I'll shout out Socket because like what we do there is we look at the code and we figure out, does this code access the network? Does it read your file system? Does it read your API keys and your environment variables? What is the code doing, right? That really tells you whether or not you should trust it. All the other things around it they can be useful indicators, but ultimately there's no replacement for just reading the code. And obviously humans can't read the code because of the scale we're operating at, but we can have AIs like Socket's AI look at every line of code and ensure that nothing is getting in that hasn't been vetted, right?
Right. And again, you're doing the work so that everyone can benefit from that. Okay.
And we can afford, by the way, to do quite a big investment into the work we're doing, because once we assess a package, that's often used by large numbers of our customers. And so we can afford to put an unreasonable amount of tokens into really trying to understand and characterize whether one of these things is trustworthy before a customer even requests it.
Great. Okay, let's move to vibe coding. So what is the process you recommend for an organization to put between a vibe coder who may not be technical at all and the environment?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because we're seeing so many non-technical folks now vibe coding and building apps, and it's awesome. I mean, I love to see it. As someone who taught computer science for a number of years, I really love to see more people coding, and I think it's going to help more people get into the field and just empower people. It's awesome. That said, like we've been talking about, developers haven't necessarily done a very good job of assessing risk of third-party code, and so how are we supposed to expect someone in sales or marketing, no offense to those folks, but like to understand what this code is doing, right? And so we need guardrails that are in place to sort of let them loose and to let them have the power of all these tools without having any of the downsides. And so the simple solution is something that we've, again, like I feel like I'm just an ad for Socket, but like we've been thinking about these problems, and so I do think we have a lot of the best solutions here. There's something called Socket Firewall that I mentioned a moment ago that you can put it in place, and it will make sure that nothing the agent does as it relates to third-party code, is unsafe. So the agent can't go out and fetch this untrusted package that we've been talking about. It can't go and install this random library that nobody should be using. It's gonna guard against that, and that's really powerful, because it means you also can let your teams experiment with whatever AI tools they want, because we're doing this at kind of the network level. Yeah. We don't need to be hooked into every new AI tool or have like approval. You don't need to approve what tools your team is using. You can kind of put this one control in place, and then it doesn't matter what AI they're using. It's all ultimately going to transit the firewall, and we're going to be able to see it and act on it.
Great. Okay, great. Another new thing since you started is LLMs. And Zach Stone at Google had asked a little bit about why haven't we seen more bad stuff via prompt injection? And is that something you think about?
Yeah, I think attackers always look for the easiest route into an organization, and they're really great at hunting for soft targets. This is one of the things, by the way, about security that makes it fun, is that it's this cat and mouse game where there's attackers, there's defenders, and when an attacker improves, a defender can respond, and when a defender improves defenses, the attackers respond and go somewhere else where the defenses are lighter. And so what we're seeing with prompt injection is that it's just not the easiest way into organizations right now, because it's sort of finicky to get them to work. It's often unclear how to get data out when you've done a prompt injection, and I think like things like the supply chain have just become like why prompt inject one organization when you can take over Axios and like have tens of millions of installs. I mean, the attackers that did Axios, they're called Team PCP is the name of the group, and they claim that. I don't think it was another one of their compromises they did earlier, but they claimed just from that one compromise they were able to steal 300 gigabytes of credentials, and those are compressed credentials. So imagine a text file compressed 300 gigabytes. You're talking, right, an untold number of organizations' tokens and keys, and so when you have things like that, I don't think it's going to be like this forever, because as I mentioned, it's really an evolving system, but I just don't think right now that's where the easy opportunities are.
Got it. And to that end, if it happens and either Socket notifies someone or they hear that they have had some kind of supply chain attack, what should they do?
So the best thing is to not be affected in the first place if you can. So definitely get these tools in place. We already talked about Socket for GitHub and the Socket firewall. There's other things you can do as well. I just want to mention to make sure for completeness people know about real quick. So people should definitely go and set up a minimum release age in their package manager. This tells your package manager to not bring in code that's newer than a certain number of days. So you can say,
what's the threshold would you recommend?
I would say, at least 24 hours would help a lot. A lot of the things that Socket catches, we catch them in a few minutes. And then we work with GitHub and we work with NPM to get that code taken down to protect the entire community, whether or not they're Socket customers. So if you set your minimum release age to 24 hours or to 3 days or something like that, you will downstream get the benefits of the work that teams like Socket are doing, even if you're not a customer. But ultimately, that's a pretty good defense, but it's not perfect. There's things that, there's malware that slips through that lasts longer than 3 days. The other thing that's interesting is there's a tension between, when you set that, let's say you set it to 7 days, right? You want to be really safe and you want to use any code newer than 7 days. Well, now what do you do when there's a vulnerability? And obviously, as we know, Mythos.
Right.
I mean, Mythos is finding vulnerabilities in a lot of open source code. The other frontier models are doing the same. And so we do need a method to bypass that waiting window and actually update our code to stay safe from vulnerabilities. And so it's this tension, direct tension between, like, as an industry, we've been trying to get people to update faster and faster. Like we always say, update your iPhone. Don't run old software. You're going to get attacked. You're going to be vulnerable. And so after like a decade of trying to get the industry to take this seriously, we've gotten people to realize it's very important to update just in time for supply chain attacks to come around. And the faster you update, the more you're running code that nobody's vetted, nobody's looked at. You don't necessarily want to be running code that was published 4 hours ago that no one's had a chance to look at, right?
Yeah.
So,
and the malicious actors are bad. Sometimes they can wait, like hang out for 24 hours, right? And then they release their code or action or whatever. So, and let's just talk about that. So many of the folks on the call probably are working in organizations where the CEO is saying, lock it down. You shouldn't be, we got to get serious about this. But open source is really important. So could you help them navigate those waters?
Well, I mean, I'm glad to hear there's CEOs that are saying lock it down. I've heard it's usually the opposite. It's like, we got to do AI everything, right? And pushing people to kind of just go for it and ignore the costs. So if there's CEOs saying that, that's new. That's good news to hear. But no, I definitely think we're seeing more of that. I think it's definitely become a board level concern in a lot of the conversations we're having, where boards are saying, why were we affected by this? What are you going to do to make sure we're not affected by these kinds of things in the future? Or one of their other portfolio companies was affected, and they want to make sure that everybody's protected. So we've been seeing a lot of focus on that, even from some CEOs.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Ben Kesnoka, co-founder of Village Global. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Village Global podcast, where we go deep on all of the biggest topics in tech. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to see you for the next one.